Hello, everyone. Bojo, Anine, Emily Curtin, Indigenous. My name is Emily Curtin, and I am a senior manager at Science North. And I formerly led our outreach and Indigenous initiatives department. And now I'm working on our Northwest expansion project. And I work out of our Thunder Bay satellite office, which is located in the Robinson Superior Treaty area in the traditional and ancestral lands of Fort William First Nation. But today, I am joining you from our main location in Sudbury, which is in the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and in the traditional and ancestral lands of Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and Wanapitei First Nation. First off, I would just like to say miigwech to everyone for joining the call today. This week, as you know, is Treaties Recognition Week. And this is a week that honors the importance of treaties and is intended to promote educational opportunities surrounding treaty rights and relationships. And learning about our collective treaty rights and responsibilities fosters greater understanding and nurtures relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Today, we have invited Cindy Crow and Melissa Roberts of Blue Sky Strategic Group to talk to us about treaties. There they are, their history and meaning, and how we can all live the treaty relationship together. Before I pass it over to them, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping items for everyone who's tuning in. So this session is being broadcast live on our YouTube channel, and it will be available for viewing on there afterwards. Please feel free to share the link with your family and friends. And we'll be together for about an hour today. So we'll go from now until about 11 a.m. Cindy and Melissa's presentation will take about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions for the last 15 minutes. We're monitoring the chat as well, so feel free to post questions in there, and we'll make sure that we address them at the end of the call. If we run over time and you have a hard stop at 11 a.m., please feel free to exit, and then you can watch the final minutes on YouTube later. And if any members of the public are tuning in and you would like a copy of this presentation following the time, you can DM us on Science North's Facebook page, and we can connect you with Cindy and Melissa so that you can get a copy. Now, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Cindy and Melissa. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Melissa, are you having trouble hearing us? Melissa, are you able to hear us? We can't hear you. Can everybody hear Melissa? Okay, so while they're working on troubleshooting that situation, because I don't think we can hear Melissa right now, I'm going to just do a little bit of introductions here. So our land acknowledgement. Ojashkokijik Traditional Teaching Lodge, operating as Blue Sky, actually it's Strategic Group now, is an Indigenous community-led organization based in Neebing, Ontario. We respectfully acknowledge that place as being within the Benisse-Wequidong, the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation. Blue Sky is committed to providing cultural education and continuing to foster relationships across the gaps in the Thunder Bay and larger area. The board of directors is made up of Anishinaabeg from Opwaganassanin, Red Rock Indian Band, and surrounding areas, and settler descendants to Turtle Island. We wish to welcome you to the land of our ancestors on the shores of Gitchigaming, Lake Superior, and respectfully acknowledge Indigenous people who have been here since time immemorial. We would also like to recognize the distinct Métis individuals and communities. By utilizing the perspectives of our Indigenous and non-Indigenous worldviews, Blue Sky encourages understanding and respect for all individuals, regardless of ethnicity, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religious or political beliefs, or other ideologies. Our teaching process involves an open dialogue in an interactive learning environment that promotes mutual respect for all people. Miigwech. Melissa, can we hear you now? Okay.
I'm
Melissa,
so sorry.
Okay, we can hear you now. I can hear you. I just wanted to make sure we could hear you. So yeah, so a little bit about myself, and then I'm hoping Melissa's going to be able to introduce herself. Memishkwe Gabawik,
Oh
Nindijnikaz,
boy.
Adik Nindodem, Opwa Ganosanin Nindonjiba,
Can you
Nibin.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you. I think there might be a lag
Yep.
on your end, but we'll do our best here. Melissa,
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. I feel terrible that this isn't going as smoothly as it should. Bonjour and denawe maganadag. Nishwaswe magiziwak indigenous makwado dem anemki wekwidon and donji. Apachigo migwech bizendaliag. My spirit name is Nishwaswe Magiziwak, and I said hello, all of my relations. My English name is Melissa Roberts. I'm Bear Clan, and I live in Thunder Bay. Currently, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Algonquins, and the the village of South River in southern Ontario, so just south of North Bay. I'm a maker of things and a pollinator of ideas. I do my best to help share Anishinaabe knowledge. I'm a knowledge keeper, a drum carrier, singer, powwow dancer with Makwa, and I work with Science North and Cindy with Blue Sky. I also do a lot of consulting with the local school boards, and wherever I go, it seems that I have the opportunity to share knowledge, that I do so respectfully and humbly based on the teachings that I've been given. Miigwech.
Miigwech, I'm really grateful that you got connected.
Me too.
So just a little bit about the Blue Sky Strategic Group. We are a select group of Indigenous experts with skills and experience providing full package consulting services. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. Perhaps there's some content that you need to have reviewed. Perhaps there's some training that your organizations would like to receive. There's many services that we can provide to you. So we're really grateful to be here and really grateful for the invitation from Science North. We've been working with Science North for quite some time.
We love them.
Yes, we do. Just a little wee bit before we get into the treaty discussion. This is a slide that we share with all of our training because we feel it's very important for our viewers to be able to understand what makes up our Indigenous identity and what is important to us. And so very quickly, you can see starting in the east that it's our connection to the land, our relationship with Eki. I mean, it's all about Mother Earth, our connection to community. And community doesn't necessarily mean a physical place. It can be an emotional support community as well. Our connection to the traditional languages, and ultimately the connection to our culture, our connection to ourselves. And yeah, that picture is from this sacred land here in Nibin. Okay, go ahead, Melissa.
So I thought, and again, that we're speaking in very general terms, and except for a specific example that we'll give at the end that deals with Opwaganashinin, or a Red Rock Indian band, the Annuities claim that they're currently working through in the court system. But the information that we're sharing today is a very brief overview of treaties, and you're strongly encouraged to speak to and educate yourself about the treaties, because there are people in our community and in our culture whose whole lives are dedicated to learning and being able to memorize the treaties and their true spirit and intent. So to start with an understanding of the treaties, it's important to understand where we come from, what our worldview is as Indigenous people. And there's a picture of how what settlers refer to as North America and what Indigenous people refer to as Turtle Island. Because Turtle Island is part of our creation story, and is the earth, Mother Earth, who gives us everything that we need to survive. And as Anishinaabe people, it's important that we take those earthly gifts to help ourselves have successful and thriving lives, but we also need to respect and honor all of these earthly gifts in a reciprocal way by sharing them, by sharing the medicine, by honoring them, by not taking more than what we need, so that way there's enough for everyone. It's also important for us to remember that we need to protect the earth and all of her earthly gifts, sometimes referred to as natural resources, for 7 generations to come. And the important aspect about our Indigenous worldview too is that even though we are different nations of people across Turtle Island, we all inherently know that it's up to all of us to work together as a large community to be able to take care of the earth around us, because it's such an interactive system that one area that's not being looked after, if the water is polluted and not being cared for, then other areas, the plants, the flora, the fauna, all of those things will suffer as well. So we all knew that we had to work together to protect the earth. This is a map just very quickly to look at. It's certainly not definitive, but it's been put together to show the overlapping areas of nations. So we didn't have boundaries or we didn't have borders per se, but we had territories that we knew we were responsible for maintaining, for looking after, traditional hunting and fishing and gathering territories. So you can see here how they overlap, and all of Turtle Island had Indigenous people living on it and being stewards of the land and the water, and in relationship with all the plants and animals, the animate and inanimate objects, because to us, everything on this earth, above it and below it, in the water, above the water, below the water, all the things that walk and crawl and fly, walk on 2 legs, walk on 4 legs. We have the standing relatives, our trees, the wind, the earth, the water, the fire. They all have spirit, and so we're in relationship with all of them, and it's our responsibility to take care of them.
Yeah, and this map is a really cool tool. It will be included in the resources. So again, as Emily mentioned at the beginning, if you'd like to receive a copy of this presentation and the extensive resources we pulled together for you, please send a message to Science North on their Facebook, and they'll be able to get that to you. Yeah, if you haven't seen this map, please check it out. This picture, my goodness, when I saw this picture, when I was pulling this together, I went, boy, was I nice and slim back then. This was in 2010, and we were so fortunate. Blue Sky was able to do some ceremonies on the grounds where the archaeological digs were being performed in preparation for the widening of the highway 17. And so that artifact that you can see in my hand, I was so excited to be able to hold this item. They said it was over 10,000 years old, and before it went into the property of the university, I got to hold it and got to have a picture taken with it. So it's very exciting, but it's something to keep in mind that, our ancestors have been here for so long, and many would argue that we were also here before the Ice Age. So, are we ever really truly going to know how long we were here? I'm not sure. But yeah, it's an interesting, again, our worldview.
So the next little bit talks just very briefly about pre-contact, and I'd like to remind everyone that I am not a knowledge keeper with respect to treaty belts or wampum belts. So the information I'm sharing are just the teachings that I've received. And we look at these wampum belts, and there'll be two examples that we'll be looking at shortly. But this is pre-contact information. And the fact, like I mentioned earlier, that nations worked together regardless of where we lived in order to take care of Mother Earth. And in order to create these agreements, we had something called wampum belts that were created from the quahog shell that's found only on the Atlantic Ocean side of Canada. And you can see it's a clam shell with some purple and some white. Uh, Wampumpiag. So wampum is the short form of wampumpiag. That means white string of shell beads. And each of these beads that you will see in the wampum belts, a little bit bigger than a grain of salt, grain of rice, a couple of times the size of a grain of rice. And the women would make these shells using hand tools, and it would take them 3 days to make one bead. By cutting and drilling and shaping the shells that would then be beaded in specific patterns. And within that process of making the wampum belts, the stories would be told of the agreement between the people that were represented by the belts. And then they would be recited through the oral tradition once or twice a year to renew that agreement. A feast would be held, and in that way, the agreement would remain alive and have its own spirit. Today, if you were to recreate a wampum belt, and I spoke to a woman who does this, it would cost, if you used authentic shells, it would cost at least $350,000 just for the shells to be created. So you can understand how much these traditional belts are actually worth. They must be insured for millions of dollars, I would think.
So precious, right?
Yeah.
So very precious.
So one of the pre-contact belts is called the dish with one spoon wampum. And you'll see here a picture of the actual wampum belt, probably a couple of thousand shell beads on there. And this was a wampum belt that was created in agreement between the nations in the area that we know as Toronto today. And again, it spoke to the fact that all of us have to work together to protect Mother Earth and her rights, because while we have a right to take earthly gifts from Mother Earth, she also has the right to be looked after by good stewards. So in the center of this wampum belt, you see a purple shape that represents the one dish, and the white spot in the middle would be the one spoon. And the one dish represents the finite resources that exist on Mother Earth, on Ake. So even back before contact, we knew there was only so much that we could take from Mother Earth before it was going to run out. So that drove all of our hunting and fishing and harvesting practices, where we would move from one area to the other in order to not fish, hunt, or harvest out a certain area. So with the one dish, the people who were engaged in that agreement with this wampum belt knew that they could not, or they should only take as much as they needed to not be greedy, because there always had to be something left for everyone to share, including the following 7 generations. In the Haudenosaunee way of believing or way of thinking, we say 7 generations in the Anishinaabe, and they say for all the unborn children. So what are treaties? The Western view of a treaty, it's a formal and binding written agreement. It means consultation and consent with and from Indigenous people, and it must occur and be mutually beneficial. So it sort of sums it up. So when we have treaties, when we sign treaties, they were peace treaties so that we could live harmoniously together without interfering in each other's way of life. They were economic treaties so that the settlers, the Europeans, could use some of the resources or the earthly gifts that Mother Earth shares so graciously and generously with us, but also meant that as Indigenous people, for it to be mutually beneficial, that we would receive a fair share of whatever money, quote unquote, or whatever economic success was achieved by the extraction of these resources. Now, in the Indigenous worldview, we talk about being on this land since time immemorial, and we've used, like I mentioned, wampum belts and oral traditions, birch bark scrolls, and many other ways, storytelling, things like that, to show that we have created and maintained agreements between nations. And The big difference, I think, between Western view and Indigenous views for treaties are the spirit and intent of what was discussed as far as the agreement goes, more than the actual words. So the spirit and intent of what was discussed is something that I ask you to keep in mind as we go through the presentation, because that is more important than the actual words. And primarily that's because of the cultural differences, the language barriers. We didn't speak the same language as the settlers, the Europeans who came. And so through interpreters, we would hear what the treaty or the agreement was supposed to entail and encompass, and that's what we agreed to, not the written word that was put down on paper, because we didn't have signed paper contracts. And lastly, it says their treaties are sacred and binding in agreements, more so than legal prerogatives. So as an Indigenous person, once I give my word to say that I'm going to help you out, then that is my word and that is the truth. And it's the same thing with our nations. Once we say we're entering into an agreement or a treaty with you, we treat that as a sacred living entity and a binding agreement. So when we look at treaties, again, the Western treaty, view of signing a treaty refers to two parties or two nations or a group of nations. Our understanding of who are the signatories to treaties are a little bit different. So the first signatory, go ahead, Cindy. The first signatory are human beings, and we are all the same race. We understand that there are different cultures around the world, that we have different skin colors, different languages, different beliefs, different worldviews. But we firmly believe that we are all one race because we all have the same needs. And you know, think about like Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. You know, we understood that. So we have a need, all human beings, for food and shelter, clothing, safety, security, love, the ability to feel like we belong to a group. And so all of those needs are what create the race of human beings. And having the belief in that means that we're all responsible for being stewards of Ake, or Mother Earth. The second signatory in our worldview is creation. The environment has rights and humans have rights. But like I said in the pre-contact discussion about wampum belts, the earthly gifts or the natural resources are finite, so we have to protect them. And we have to make sure that we're in a reciprocal relationship with the earth so that we can make sure that our needs are being met, but also the needs of Mother Earth and all of the gifts that she gives us. In some nations and Indigenous nations, I believe in like New Zealand, they've actually gone to court and won court cases that grant personhood to rivers and other bodies of water in order to protect them from pollution and changing the water systems that the world around those rivers and lakes rely on so heavily for survival.
Yeah, every once in a while you'll see something in the news about another country that is adopting these same policies.
Mm-hmm. And finally, the third signatory to the treaties that we sign are the 7 generations that will follow us. So with the gifts that we are given as human beings, not just as Anishinaabe people, but with the gifts that we are being given or have been given comes a responsibility. So we have a responsibility to take care of our gifts that we have, our special abilities, the things that we can do to help other people in the world around us. And we're also given gifts from the earth and all of the entities that we're in relationship with. So again, it's a mutually responsible relationship. All of us have a right, the 7 generations to come have a right to the same earthly gifts that we have access to now. And we all have a responsibility to those unborn generations. And by thinking of it this way, by thinking of 7 generations to follow, it means that we should always be doing our very best through the generations to make sure that the earth and its gifts are available and accessible for the generations who follow us. So we're thinking about our children, our grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren on down the line, and each new generation thinks the same way. So in our worldview, it means that the earth will always be taken care of. The first pre-contact belt that was created or entered into, did I say pre? I meant post-contact belt, is the two-row wampum. And this is one belt that I'm sure many people have seen. It was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch settlers who came to the area. If you look at the belt, we have parallel lines of the purple and parallel lines of white. So the white is what represents the bodies of water that the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch settlers would travel on. One line of the purple represents the Dutch ships, and the other purple line represents the canoe of the Haudenosaunee. And what's interesting to note here is that the intention of this wampum belt was to show that both boats enter the water at the same time, the river of life at the same time, side by side. This wampum belt refers to the fact that in agreement they have said that they will live mutually respectful of each other's way of doing things, each other's worldviews, each other's lives, without interference. And at the time the wampum belt was made, the settlers had to understand and live by the agreements made between humans and creation and future generations. So the hope was that the Dutch settlers would understand that when we sign a treaty or make a wampum belt, there are three entities that sign that agreement. And so it was up to them to understand that it wasn't just human to human. It was, the settlers with the humans, creation, and 7 generations to follow. When we talk about Indigenous intentions behind treaties and wampum belts, we think about, or we ask the question, what did Indigenous nations understand or have experience with regards to signing a document? And that would be nothing, because we didn't sign a paper document. So our intentions behind treaties and creating agreements and wampum belts is that we would be focused on the oral tradition, the things that were spoken to us, more than the written word. So along come, opportunities to make treaties, sign treaties with the European settlers who came here. And a lot of the nations who signed treaties were perhaps living in poor economic conditions, and they would feel a great deal of hope that things would improve, because the treaty's intentions were that they would be peaceful and mutually beneficial to both the settlers and the Indigenous nations who were signing them. They promised peace, friendship, and prosperity. And something I read in the treaties when they're being signed is that the Crown promised to protect Indian tribes once they acquired the land from them. So now we can see that there's already a shift in what's happening between the intentions and spirits of treaties. So the motivation for the Crown to sign treaties was being able to access or acquire land and natural resources from Indigenous peoples. And the First Nations motivation was protection and assistance economically, through medicine, through education, those sorts of things. We think about 2 versions of the treaty, and this information comes from Treaty Number 9, and there's a National Film Board documentary called Trick or Treaty that we've listed, I think, in the resource section at the end of this. That's really very interesting documentary if you would like to check that out. So 2 versions of the treaty include the trick and the truth. So in the oral tradition, details about the treaties were told to the signatories, so the human signatories, and through to creation 7 generations to come, that there was no mention of surrendering of land. And in our worldview, we can't give away what we don't own. So I can't come into your house and tell you, well, you got to move now because I've just given away your house to somebody walking down the street who said they really liked it. So we cannot give away something we don't own, and we have never believed that we own Mother Earth. We're in relationship with her. The treaties that were then signed, where the chief and their headmen put their mark, usually an X, or sometimes they signed with a symbol of their name. They signed based on what they were told by the crown. And for the most part, each treaty and every treaty said they would always be able to hunt and fish and travel the way they always had, without restriction, regardless of anything else, that they would still be entitled to their traditional way of life forever. The written and signed documents, however, presented a different story that sometimes took many, many years, including up until today, for what the crown actually meant. So while they were told they could always use the land the way they always had, there were pieces put in the treaties that said, unless, according to the crown, that land could be used for lumber or mining extraction, commercial fishing, expansion of settler communities, or any other regulations the crown felt like implementing. And that comes right from Treaty Number 9 territory, James Bay Number 9 territory, or treaty, I'm sorry. So they were told they could continue to live the way they want. They signed the treaty based on that. But then when it was actually understood years later, those rights only existed until the crown decided they wanted to use the land for their own purposes, to make money for themselves, to expand their own communities and settlements. So, like I said, the treaties were signed, and sometimes it took up to 25 years later before their true intentions were understood, because, again, there was a language barrier, there was an education barrier, and the ways that we believed things were signed and presented to us, we believed that the treaties were signed in good faith because they're sacred and binding agreements to us. We felt that the other signatory should also be acting that way. The 1850 Robinson Superior Treaty runs from an area from Pigeon River border crossing, south of Thunder Bay, down to Sault Ste. Marie, and there's a bit of a map there. And we talk about Fort William First Nations community as an example. Fort Williams First Nation Reserve 52 is located in the Thunder Bay area, so actually just across the Kaministiquia River from us. And this information was shared with me by Gail Bannon, who's a knowledge keeper and one of the mountain keepers in Fort William First Nation. And she was telling me that the reserve lands were massive, and they were divided 5 times as a result of agreements made with the railroad that was coming through there. Initially, the land extended out into an area called Slate River Valley, which was incredibly fertile farmland that the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, had been farming successfully for many, many years, decades, hundreds of years. And because the railroad said they were going to put a line through there. Well, that never happened. And they ended up then selling that land to a lot of Dutch farmers who came through this way, looking for the free land or the opportunity to continue to farm. Then they were moved from one side of the major river to another, again with thoughts, and these are all separately signed treaties. So 5 different land claim treaties that were entered into, and they were moved from one side of the river to the other because, again, there was a promise that they were going to build an extension to the port on the south side of the city of Thunder Bay that was then called Fort William. Once they got to the south side of the river, the Kaministiquia River, they were moved away again because the railway was going to expand onto that side. And in all of those promises, the railway never extended through there. So they lost their land. And more importantly, they lost total access to a water source. So now they were going to have to come up with a way to access water. And water is life. And so we know that not having access to being close to a water source, despite being on the shores of Lake Superior, meant that they still had to create ways to get water into the community. At the same time, the settlers in Fort William created a rifle range that the targets for the military to practice their rifle skills was aimed at the backyards of where people were living. And so people then had to move their homes because the rifle range was, they refused to move the rifle range or reorient it, the target sites. So the people had to move out of their own safety. And then finally, the last example is when there was a pulp and paper mill that still operates, I believe, in Thunder Bay. They had something called a compressed brick factory, and they would strip all of this bark off of the pine trees that we had in the area, and they dumped it at the foot of an Mkiwaju, or Thunder Mountain, on Fort William First Nation Reserve. And the bark pile is still there. It's absolutely massive, and it's a danger to the people living on the reserve and to the environment. They have test holes drilled around the bark pile that they check every month. I suppose there are possibilities of spontaneous combustion or fires and all of the turpentines that are leaching into the land. So Gail was telling me that if the land was reclaimed that had been lost through these 3 treaties, it would extend 8 miles or 12.9 kilometers into the city of Thunder Bay itself.
I'll just let you know, Melissa, we've got about 10 minutes left to the formal presentation process. Thank you.
So this is, Cindy, did you want to talk about this one?
I'll just briefly mention that, I just took a clip from this video that the art gallery put together. It's a wonderful, wonderful video. If you get a chance to watch it, there's some very informed presenters on there, including Gene Nowagijik. And it's really cool to be able to share his story. It gives me goosebumps every time I think about it, that, his great grandfather was one of the signatories on this treaty. And so it's amazing to me to be able to hear the stories from the families of the signatories. And he's very clear that he is sovereign, and they have unceded land. He's very clear about that. And he's also very clear about what's happening with the treaty since it was signed, and the process that our communities are currently going through. Because I am a member to this 1850 Robinson Superior Treaty, and he's sharing on there, how the government, and we're not going to get into this too much, but how the government used the money that was supposed to be set aside for our nations to build roads. So, that's just one of the realizations since our annuity court cases have been in the court. So I'll just mention that briefly, because I am aware of our time ticking by here.
So this is the Red Rock. This is your treaty case, right, Cindy?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so Cindy has shared some information with me that I summarized, and I can share very quickly with you what their annuity case has involved. So in phase 1, it talks about the treaty being signed in 1850. So I'm just going to look at my notes here because it's pretty extensive, the things that have happened. So the government of Canada and the Anishinaabe agreed to a treaty. They both say, yep, this is awesome. Let's enter into a treaty together. But the government says that the land occupied by the Lake Nipigon bands, including Red Rock Indian Band, is worthless. It will always be worthless. They'll never get anything off of the land of any value. And if you stop and think about the area, it was a huge lumbering operation there. I mean, they're still cutting forest in that area today. So because they were convinced that the land would never amount to anything, they offered $1.61 to each person of the Red Rock Indian Band every year. But the Anishinaabe said, no, we don't, that's not good enough. Like, we are entering, it's got to be mutually respective. We want a fair share of every dollar that you make. So the government agrees to this fair share, but says it will never exceed $4 a year. Yep, you can have your fair share, but it's only ever going to come to $4 a year for all the resource extraction that we're going to do, for the water power, the hydropower, hydroelectric power, for all the, I mean, they weren't even talking about that stuff at that point. So they're talking about the fact that, it's only going to be $4 per share. Your land will always be useless or worthless. And before this point, the First Nations used to get $10 a year. But what would happen is that people would hang around there'd be people who would know when treaty days were, annuity days were, payment days were, and they would just wait for these Anishinaabe people to get their $10, and then they would say, hey, that's a nice shiny coin that means really nothing. It's not worth anything. Let me trade you a blanket for that, or let me trade you this for that. So the people would have their money stolen before they could even think of a way to use it. And we didn't have money the way money exists today. So the government says, and this is where it comes into trust, a fellow by the name of Sir John Colborne in 1829 said they were going to create a new policy that would protect the good people, the Indian tribes, from being robbed, and we would put their money into a trust that the government would hold. The kicker was that if Cindy wanted to go, or her ancestors wanted to go and access that money, they would have to explain why they wanted to use the money that was theirs. And if the government decided that wasn't a good enough reason, they wouldn't give Cindy her money. So it was a very paternalistic way of treating the Anishinaabe people. So we can't allow them to have this money. But then phase one, Red Rock Indian Band won, because the judge said, you can't do that. That's not your money to hold. And it belongs to the people. And so he accepted that the true meaning was a fair share, and overturned the government's ability to say it's only $4 that you get. They also had to pay back court costs that were accrued by the Red Rock Indian Band. Phase two, the Ontario government then says, wait a second, the Red Rock Indian Band should have sued us in 1875. And that the contract had run out, or the time had run out for them to sue. Well, what a lot of people may not know is that in 1876, the Indian Act was created. And until 1951, that Indian Act made it illegal for any Native people to hire a lawyer. So 1 year after they said the statute had run out for the Red Rock Indian Band or Anishinaabe people to sue them, saying this is not right, they created the Indian Act, which until 1951 made it illegal for us to hire a lawyer to help us fight any wrongs that we had been subject to. So the judge also agreed, saying that no, there is no statute of limitations on this, and Red Rock Indian Band won their phase two court case. The information then talked about Part 2B. There was an issue where something had come into play, saying that because the treaties were created between the Crown and the Anishinaabe people, that because of who the king was, or the Crown was, they could not be sued, because the king would never do anything wrong to its loyal subjects. And that was not law. That was just something that seemed to become law because enough people in Europe said that. So again, there's so much more to this, but this was something that was the argument that Red Rock Indian Band used for this was a court case from the 1800s called Feathering the Queen. And somebody had applied for a patent, and then the Crown used that same patent without his permission, without paying royalties. And so he sued the Crown, saying, you don't have the right to do that. And he won. So the judges for Red Rock Indian Band used that same court case to say that you you can sue the Crown and hold them responsible because it's not actually a law, if that makes sense. So the judge again agreed. Ontario appealed the agreement. Government of Ontario appealed. The judge said no, they can sue the Crown, so they won that phase as well. And then we get to phase 3. Canada in 1875, which continues today, the Canadian government, the Ontario government continue to argue over who is going to be responsible financially for land claim payments, for education programs, for ensuring that Indigenous children receive the same level and opportunities for healthcare as non-Indigenous children. So it's a fight like, we don't pay, you pay. No, we don't pay, you pay. So in 1890, the Canadian government, the Ontario government, go back to this whole, well, the land that the Red Rock Indian Band and the other Lake Nipigon bands have really is worthless. Meanwhile, they've been building roads, they've been logging. Sure, they're charging stumpage fees, but they're saying, really, we didn't make any money off of that. In fact, we lost money because we had to pay for surveyors and we had administrative costs. So the land is worth nothing. We didn't make anything. Sure, we'll pay you your fair share, but that's zero because we didn't make any money. And we'll never make any money. So Ontario and Canadian government sign a paper, an agreement saying, yep, we're never going to have to pay anything to these bands because the land is worth nothing. And so now at this end, phase 3 talks about what will those payments be, because the judge again ruled in favor of Red Rock Indian Band, saying, no, you have to have fair annuity, fair payments based on the treaties that were signed, based on the spirit and intent of the treaty, of the oral tradition, not the little things that were added in, knowing full well that the signatories couldn't read. And so now they're trying to identify how they can quantify something called Mino B'Madswin, or the good life. It's the good life, not the moderate life, and the money that will be given or through settlement will be enough to get these communities on their feet to help deal with the issues of poverty and things like that, to have more self-governance. The interesting thing too is that we know that we would bankrupt Canada and Ontario if every single dollar and cent was given up that should be awarded because of fair and equal amount based on the years and inflation and things like that. So because we respect the people that we've entered into a treaty with, we don't want that to happen. But we do know that we are entitled by the legal agreements of treaties, that we are entitled to our fair share of what our ancestors agreed to. Whew!
Well done, Melissa. You summed that up so good. And I'm looking at the time here. I'm going to suggest that maybe we just do a quick summary here and open it up for questions. Again, you can ask to get a copy of everything from Science North, and so you'll have this for reference material. But of course, the big message here today is that every single person in Canada that lives in an area where there has been a treaty signed, there are still some unceded land, but, or I should say there is still some unceded land, but yeah, we are all treaty people. And There's a wonderful quotation here that John Trudell provided, and an excerpt from Crazy Horse. And I'm just going to check what else we had here. So some important messaging about how we can, as individuals, impact this very important dialogue. And yes, so all of these things, again, will be provided to you within the resources. I love the last line here on this slide, be humble and keep learning, because of course we're all learning together, and we're all trying to learn how to understand each other's perspective. And then there is this list here on this slide, but we are providing 3 pages of additional resources for you. You can see the link here for the native land, which again is a very cool, a really cool resource. And of course, we're always, always, always grateful to Science North for all the opportunities that are provided to us. We applaud their efforts moving forward. We're really excited to see what the new facility is going to look like. I mean, I've had the great pleasure of taking my kids when they were much, much younger to the Science North in Sudbury, but now I get to look forward to bringing my grandchildren to the one here in Thunder Bay, and I'm really excited about that. So yeah, so if we can open it up, and I'm not sure how to stop the share. Somebody can probably help me with this. There we go. Yay, thank you. And yeah, if we're able to open it up for questions or discussion. So I think Emily's going to help us with this part.
I'm going to help you with this part. Miigwech to both of you. I feel I'm going to offer you my virtual tobacco for all of the lessons that you just shared with all of us, and just the incredible history and difficult history that is connected to a lot of that. No one has put any questions into the chat, but I have one that is always, it's a huge question, and it's always something that people ask me and I ask all the time. As non-Indigenous people, we know we have responsibilities under the treaty, and it feels sometimes like really the treaty is something that is at a government level that we can't really affect. Like personally, on a day-to-day basis as a human being, it feels like it's not something that we can really have impact on. And so I don't know how you would answer this question of how do we do better as non-Indigenous people, as individuals? How do we do better to help being a treaty person?
I think I'll jump in with at an organization level, your corporation, your business, your industry, government, as you've mentioned. The best thing that we can do is that if you're introducing a new project or program, or you're wanting to update your policies and procedures, things like that, it's really, really, really important to invite the Indigenous communities that are local to your area of service to invite them to participate in those activities. Not at the shovel part, what do you call that? Groundbreaking, thank you. Not at the groundbreaking, like once you're there. No, way at the beginning, when you're first starting the conversation about your project. That's when you want to invite the communities in, because you will be surprised at how beneficial it is for all parties involved to have those conversations, because by having the Indigenous worldview as part of your process, I feel that you will be much more successful, because if you have buy-in from the communities from the beginning, and you have their support, and you're listening to their guidance and their thousands of years of experience, your project is going to benefit from that. So I would encourage you to do that. And then the other example I like to give is, as individuals, when you're out shopping, talk to the person that's standing in line next to you at the register. Let's learn how to initiate a dialogue and foster those relationships. So yeah, Melissa, what have you got to add to that?
You're right, Emily. I mean, this is the main question that people always ask. And, I've spoken to other elders and they say it's not up to us to tell you what needs to be done, to tell, non-Indigenous people what needs to be done. Having said that, we're all learned people here. We all have the ability to learn. And as Justice Senator Murray Sinclair said, education got us into this mess. Education's going to get us out, or words to that effect. So, you again, felt like I had to speak like an auctioneer at times this morning, because there's so much information to convey, and some of it will stick with you, and hopefully some of it made you shake your head and go, what? Oh, really? Because now you know a little bit about the truth behind treaties, and a little bit of the trickery as well. And the fact that after hundreds and hundreds of years, Indigenous people still want to have that relationship. And we're not looking for more than what is our fair share, like anybody in this world does, right? So my suggestion is seek out Indigenous people and organizations and get involved with them. Read. There's so much information online, but it's even more important to try and find Indigenous communities near you and talk to those people. Because again, we all know, despite what some people believe, everything on the internet isn't true and factual. So talk to people and find out their stories and educate yourself as much as you can.
Yeah, there's so many amazing authors out there now, Indigenous authors, and of course, many artists. And there's podcasts. I mean, I can't even list all the things that there is available to you now. So there's many, many, many ways for all of us to learn more about the Indigenous worldview and what's important to us.
And tell people about this this presentation. Ask questions. Emily's going to share our contact information. So if you have questions, and if we can't answer them, we can hopefully direct you to someone who can. But really, I mean, many miigwech to Science North, and to everyone for attending today and for having an open mind and an open heart. Because really, the main goal at the end of the day is to live together in a respectful way, and to take care of this earth and all of her earthly gifts that all of us absolutely need to survive.
Miigwech, Cindy and Melissa. I think that is a beautiful message for us to end on today. Thank you to everyone who participated today, and reminder that if you're interested in the resources that Cindy and Melissa have shared with us in the presentation, we can send that to you via email. So send Science North's Facebook page a DM and we will hook you up so that you can learn more and you can learn with us. And I think maybe we need to start a podcast, Melissa and Cindy.
Whoa.
Melissa just seeded it. Miigwech. Thank you so much, everyone.
Miigwech, Mina Wakawabamin.